Welcome to Book by Book, and tonight we're going to be walking through Second Kings. I said First Kings. I meant Second Kings before I hit record. I said first. Second Kings, chapters 22 through 25, and so this is the conclusion of the nation of Judah at this point. And so last week we read about Hezekiah and Ammon, and then his assassination, and then Josiah taking on the throne when he was just 8 years old. And so that's where we're picking up again this week in chapter 22. And Josiah brings some good reform, but it is one of those situations where it is too little, too late. And the Lord has already decreed the downfall of Jerusalem, and the exile is coming. And so while we're walking through these different kings, we should just be mindful. Isaiah was during Hezekiah's reign, and towards the end of Josiah and the kings that follow, Jeremiah is going to be stepping into serving as a prophet. And then Ezekiel is actually going to be one of the people who is taken away in exile. And so Ezekiel's ministry is mainly in Babylon. And so as we finish out Second Kings, we're going to shift over to looking at the prophets and their works, starting with Isaiah. And we might I'll probably just do the major prophets first, and then do the minor prophets as a chunk, because the Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, they're large books. And then the minor prophets are short enough to fit onto one scroll. And so they were often just called the 12. And so part of the reason why I'll probably go that route is because we have somebody who makes graphics for us. And I don't want to have them to have to make a graphic for Obadiah, which will be like a 20-minute talk, right? So, yeah. So we'll probably just do the 12. And the minor prophets as like one longer series walking through all of them. But yeah, so let's jump in here. Chapter 22, verse 1. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. His mother's name was Jedidah, daughter of Adiah. She was from Bozkat. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and followed completely in the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. And so this is a Hezekiah-like king here after Manasseh and Ammon were so terrible. And so here we have somebody who's coming back into following the path of David. In the 18th year of his reign, King Josiah sent the secretary, Shaphan, son of Azaliah, the son of Meshullam, to the temple of the Lord. He said, "Go up to Hilkiah, the high priest, and have him get ready the money that has been brought into the temple of the Lord, which the doorkeepers have collected from the people. Have them entrusted to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple, and have these men pay the workers who repair the temple of the Lord, the carpenters, the builders, and the masons. Also have them purchase timber and dress stone to repair the temple, but they need not account for the money entrusted to them, because they are honest in their dealings." So Josiah, for 10 years, he's king, and then in his 18th year as king, he actually moves ahead with doing some reform work and restoration of the temple. And so the temple, if we remember, Manasseh had brought in all kinds of idolatry into the temple. And so Josiah is maybe just at this point trying to just tidy it up, make it look better. With Hezekiah, there were some things where he paid off the Assyrians, like he gave them things to help them to just go away and not attack the city. And so the temple has lost some of its splendor. So it may be that Josiah is just trying to beautify the temple. And I don't know where he found these contractors that he didn't have to account for their labor. But I mean, I believe in a God who does miracles. And this is one of those guys who, was able to just trust these folks. But it's interesting that the priests were not asking for this kind of work to be done. And so like they're there all the time and they're just fine with it, it seems like. But really going all the way back to Solomon, who built the temple, it has been the duty of the kings to ensure that the temple is maintained. And so I don't know why nobody talked to Josiah about it beforehand, but he's in the 18th year of his reign, he's finally like, all right, let's do this. Let's clean this up. And so he has the priests get things going, coordinating stuff with the different carpenters and masons. And then in verse 8, the high priest said to Shaphan, the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. He gave it to Shaphan, who read it. Then Shaphan, the secretary, went to the king and reported to him, your officials have paid out the money that was in the temple of the Lord and have entrusted it to the workers and supervisors at the temple. So he's saying, like, hey, just so you know, we did what you asked. Then Shaphan, the secretary, informed the king, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read from it in the presence of the king. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robes. He gave these orders to Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, son of Shaphan, Akbor, son of Micaiah, Shaphan, the secretary, and Asaiah, the king's attendant. Go and inquire of the Lord for me and for the people of and for all Judah about what is written in the book that has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that burns against us, because those who have gone before us have not obeyed the words of this book. They have not acted in accordance with all that is written there concerning us. So Hilkiah, gives the book, and it is most likely a scroll. So when we read book, they didn't have this technology of binding books in this way. So the scroll of the law was found, and most likely it was, or most scholars would say that the scroll that they found was Deuteronomy. And partly because of the way that Josiah starts to act after hearing from the prophet, it's very much in line with Deuteronomic commands. And so it's not like necessarily that they found Leviticus and they're like, oh man, this is just such powerful stuff. But Deuteronomy is the reaffirmation of the covenant between Yahweh and the people of Israel. And so reading that from Moses, knowing that there's probably some kind of tradition and history, that they know who Moses is, they know their stories, they know about Egypt and all the stuff, but they have let the law slide. And so while they might know the stories, they have not been observing. And so hey, we did all the stuff you told us, then I found this book, let me read some of it to you. And Josiah tears his clothes, which is a sign of mourning. And the mourning is just simply like, we are so far off base. And so his father and his grandfather did so much to corrupt the temple that Josiah, he didn't know. Realistically, he did not know all that he needed to know. And one of the real tragedies in this is Deuteronomy tells the people, when you have a king, this is what the king should do. And one of those things is the king should write out the law. The king should have his own copy of Deuteronomy. And so the kings have not been doing this to the place where they just lost the book. That's pretty bad. And so, so that's part of why he is mourning. And so then he asks to go and inquire of the Lord. And so the priests had a method of inquiring of the Lord, which is, the two, the Urim and Thummim, which the high priest would have in their ephod, which is a way to determine yes and no type questions for when they're inquiring of the Lord. So David would say, would inquire of the Lord, say, should I go up to fight the Philistines? Yes or no is the option. And so they would reach in, and if it's the white stone, yes. If it's the black stone, no. That kind of decision making. But here, when Josiah is asking to inquire of the Lord, he's asking for much more than just yes and no's. And so he goes to Hilkiah and his people. They pick up in verse 14. Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, Akbor, Shaphan, and I keep saying that guy's name wrong. Sorry, dude. Josiah went to speak to the prophet Huldah, who was the wife of Shallum, son of Tikvah, the son of Harhas, keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the new quarter. And so the entourage here, they go and ask Huldah the prophet. Huldah is a woman who is a prophet. This is an important note here, is just that, sometimes people put a lot of emphasis on male leadership in as the only way that God ordains leadership. And here we have Huldah, who is a woman. She is not the first woman prophet in the Bible. If you remember back in Judges, we have Deborah, who serves as a leader in the nation. And people will say Deborah was only the leader because there wasn't a suitable man. And I find that to be just balderdash. All right. There's other words I could use, but I'm using balderdash. It's nonsense, because the Lord can call who he chooses. And here's another example of a woman who is associated with all kinds of leaders. She's in Jerusalem. She's associated with the temple. Her husband is working, manages the wardrobe, which is probably like the clothes for the priests that they would have to wear in their different their different functions in the temple. So all of these people are like influential leaders. So it's not that there's not a man that could be used by the Lord here. God called Huldah for this moment. And so they go and ask her, so they clearly respect her. And so they ask her, and she said to them in verse 15, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, this is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on this place and its people, according to everything written in the book the king of Judah has read, because they have forsaken me and burned incense to other gods and aroused my anger by all the idols their hands have made. My anger will burn against this place and will not be quenched. Tell the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of the Lord. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says concerning the words you heard. Because your heart was responsive and you humbled yourself before the Lord when you heard what I have spoken against this place and its people, that they would become a curse and be laid waste. And because you tore your robes and wept in my presence, I also have heard you, declares the Lord. Therefore, I will gather you to your ancestors, and you will be buried in peace. Your eyes will not see all the disaster I'm going to bring on this place. So they took her answer back to the king. And so in Deuteronomy, there are, as part of the renewal of the covenant that Moses is making, there are blessings and curses. And the blessings are, for generation and generation. If the people follow the law of the Lord, then he will continue to provide. But part of the curse for their disobedience in Deuteronomy is that they will be removed from the land that the Lord promised to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so what Huldah is saying here is like basically saying God keeps his promises. But because Josiah heard it and repented, like he will be spared from the worst of it. And we're told here that he will die in peace, and we're going to actually see that doesn't actually come to pass. He doesn't die in peace, but he doesn't die besieged on all sides by the Babylonian Empire. And so peace is a relative term in this situation, because the global politics at this moment they're fraught in this region. And so he has a relatively peaceful death. So let's jump to chapter 23. Then the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem after they reported back to him. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the people of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests and the prophets, all the people from the least to the greatest. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. The king stood by the pillar and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord to follow the Lord and to keep his commands, statutes, and decrees with all his heart and all his soul, thus confirming the words of the covenant written in this book. Then all the people pledged themselves to the covenant. So this is significant because Hezekiah was a good king, but we don't see this act even in Hezekiah of a national repentance and covenant renewal. Like this is a big deal, what he is calling the people to, and that he's going first. He is renewing the covenant with the Lord, because part of the Davidic promise that there would be a descendant of David on the throne of Jerusalem is that God says, "You will be my son and I will be your father." And so there is a particular relationship that descendants of David should have with Yahweh. And they are, while they are not priests, they are in their own way representatives of the people to the Lord. How the king goes, so goes the nation. And so Josiah is repenting and renewing the covenant before the people and inviting them to do so as well. And so as he's reading or having the covenant read to the people, that's one of the reasons why they also think it was not all 5 books of Moses, but Deuteronomy in particular, is because Deuteronomy is presented as a speech. It's presented or as a series of sermons and ends with a public renewal, reaffirming the covenant and accepting the blessings and the curses for faithfulness or disobedience. And so, so they are all on board with this. In verse 4, the king ordered Hilkiah, the high priest, the priest next in rank, and the doorkeepers to remove from the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal and Asherah and all the starry hosts. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron Valley and took the ashes to Bethel. He did away with the idolatrous priests appointed by the kings of Judah to burn incense to the high places of the towns of Judah and on those around Jerusalem. Those who burned incense to Baal and the sun and moon, to the constellations and to all the starry hosts. He took the Asherah pole from the temple of the Lord to the Kidron Valley outside Jerusalem and burned it there. He ground it to powder and scattered the dust over the graves of the common people. He also tore down the quarters of the male shrine prostitutes that were in the temple of the Lord and the quarters where women did weaving for Asherah. So he's now finally going in and removing all of the things that Manasseh brought into the temple. So these different idols to Baal and Asherah, but also they had prostitutes living at the temple, which was all part of God's commands around the priesthood, was to have no indication that there should be any kind of sexuality in their worship. And because the nations around them in Canaan, they did have sex acts as part of their different worship practices. And so, so Manasseh brought all this in. And so Josiah is driving it all out. And it is all valiant what he's doing, and it is right and it is good. But even as Huldah has said, it is not going to completely change what the Lord has already decreed. It is the destruction of Jerusalem is still pending. So, and one of the interesting things as well here is all of the places, like he takes all the things and he grinds them down, he burns them, and he like scatters things over the graves of common folks and out in the Kidron Valley. And these are like just places out of town. So it's a way of saying like removing from the city into the wasteland, essentially. And one of the interesting thoughts as well is like to demolish an idol, even down to like dust, is a way of like declaring defeat of the idol. Like this deity, this figure that people are worshiping is completely defeated in this space. And so that's part of what Josiah is trying to communicate. Like, we're done with these. These are over. No more. So he's doing all of that. Josiah brought all the priests from the town of Judah and desecrated the high places from Geba to Beersheba, where the priests had burned incense. He broke down the gateway at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the city governor, which was on the left of the city gate. Although the priests of the high places did not serve at the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, they ate unleavened bread with their fellow priests. He desecrated Topheth, which was in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one could use it to sacrifice their son or daughter in the fire to Molech. He removed from the entrance to the temple of the Lord the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun. They were in the court near the room of an official named Nathan Melech. Josiah then burned the chariots dedicated to the sun. He pulled down the altars the kings of Judah had erected on the roof near the upper room of Ahaz, and the altars Manasseh had built in the two courts of the temple of the Lord. He removed them from there, smashed them to pieces, and threw the rubble into the Kidron Valley. The king also desecrated the high places that were east of Jerusalem on the south of the hill of corruption, which is just like, why would you build anything there? Anyway, the hill of corruption, not a good name. The one Solomon, king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the vile goddess of the Sidonians, for Chemosh, the vile god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the people of Ammon. Josiah smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles that covered the sites and covered the sites with human bones. And so he is completely eliminating all idolatrous worship throughout the land. He's just going for it. Now, this is where it gets one of the things too, like these are things that have been there since Solomon. So it's not that all of this is Manasseh's fault, but Manasseh like went all out for all of this idolatry. But Solomon was making concessions with these different idols, largely because of the alliances that he had through all of his marriages, and all of these women from all these different nations worship these other gods. And so Solomon was making these concessions to add these different idols into the land. And so he's going through all of the land of Judah and wiping out everything. But he's not done there, because verse 15, even the altar at Bethel, which is in Israel, right? Bethel, Dan to Bethel, those are the two idols in Israel. So he's crossing out from the land of Judah back up into the land that was Israel. Even the altar at Bethel, the high place made by Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin, even the altar at the high place, he demolished it. He burned the high place and ground it to powder, and burned the Asherah pole also. Then Josiah looked around, and when he saw the tombs that were there on the hillside, he had the bones removed from them and burned on the altar to defile it, in accordance with the word of the Lord, proclaimed by the man of God who foretold these things. Now go back, way back in 1 Kings, and there was a prophet who came to Jeroboam, and they were like, "You're just trouble." And he said, "This altar is going to break." And as a sign, it broke open and all the ash fell out, right? This is what he's talking about here. Like this altar is ultimately going to fail. And Josiah is the one who fulfills that prophecy from that prophet way back in the history of the northern kingdom. And so he looks around, and he's bringing all of these bones and scattering them on the altars as a way of making it unclean, unholy to any deity. Like, it's like, this is all bad. This is a wasteland now. Do not try to worship anything here, is basically what Josiah is saying. Verse 17, the king asked, "What is that tombstone I see?" The people of the city said, "It marks the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and pronounced against the altar of Bethel the very things you have done to it." "Leave it alone," he said. "Don't let anyone disturb his bones." So they spared his bones and those of the prophet who had come from Samaria. And so, so he is in what is basically a land that was conquered by Assyria, but Assyria is losing power and influence right now. And this might be part of why he's able to go up into the land, because there's a lot of different political machinations happening in the Assyrian Empire, and the Egyptian Empire is rising. And so he's moving into land that is enemy territory, and he's starting to like break apart the idolatrous practices up there. And part of his motivation could be as he's reading through Deuteronomy, like he's hearing about God's promise for this land. It's like, we should go back and take this land. Like, this was ours. Like, God gave this to us. And so that might be why he's moving up there as well. So just as he had done at Bethel, Josiah removed all the shrines at the high places that the kings of Israel had built in the towns of Samaria, and that had aroused the Lord's anger. Josiah slaughtered all the priests of those high places on the altars and burned those high places on the altars and burned human bones on them. Then he went back to Jerusalem. So he's purging all of the uncleanness that he can get to, basically. And so this is the biggest religious reform in the history of the people of Israel. Like, this is like he's doing the most to purge the land of idolatry. So Josiah he's a good king. He's trying to honor the Lord and trying to bring the people back into covenant faithfulness. And as a seal to that covenant faithfulness, he also wants to help them worship the Lord in a big and profound way. In verse 21, the king gave this order to all the people: celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in the book of the covenant. Neither in the days of the judges who led Israel, nor in the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah had any such Passover been observed. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was celebrated to the Lord in Jerusalem. And so this is Hezekiah had a Passover, but that Passover was kind of spread out throughout all the land. Here, Josiah is telling the people, come to Jerusalem. Come here and celebrate the Passover here, which is what the Lord told them to do. And so when it says there hasn't been one like this ever, this is because this is the first one. Like, we don't even read about Passover with David or Solomon. This is really the first, like, come to Jerusalem and actually do this Passover thing the way the Lord had instructed them to do. And so this is part of the remembering of God's saving work when he rescued the people from slavery in Egypt. And as Josiah is destroying all of these idols throughout the land, and this is another kind of liberation from slavery to idolatry. And so remembering this and celebrating the Passover, and these all going together. And we see here, this is all in the 18th year. Josiah found the scroll in his 18th year, and he did not waste any time. Like, all of this is happening in 1 year. He's a go-getter. So verse 24, furthermore, Josiah got rid of the mediums and spiritists, the household gods, the idols, and all the other detestable things seen in Judah and Jerusalem. This he did to fulfill the requirements of the law written in the book that Hilkiah the priest had discovered in the temple of the Lord. Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength, in accordance with the law, all the law of Moses. And so as we hear all his heart, soul, and strength, that should also put a little flag up. Where have we heard that before? Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And so Josiah is doing it, and he's trying to help the people to come along and do this as well. Verse 26, nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah, because of all that Manasseh had done to arouse his anger. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence, as I removed Israel, and I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple about which I said, my name shall be there. As for the other events of Josiah's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? While Josiah was king, Pharaoh Necho, creator of the wafers, which are gross, king of Egypt, went up to the Euphrates River to help the king of Assyria. King Josiah marched out to meet him in battle, but Necho faced him and killed him at Megiddo. Josiah's servants brought his body in a chariot from Megiddo to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, and anointed him and made him king in place of his father. So the Lord is still committed to his path. All of these reforms aren't ultimately going to lead the Lord to relent from removing Judah from the land and forsaking Jerusalem. But it is still like he is an honored king. He did well. Now, when Egypt is going to come up and try to assist Assyria here, and Josiah stands against him, Egypt's path to the Euphrates is through Judah. And so he doesn't want another army coming through his land. And so he's kind of in a no-win situation here because the Egyptians are very powerful at this stage. They're growing in power, and so Judah has been reduced to just the nation, the tribe of Judah. All the other tribes have been removed from the land, and so he's kind of on his own here. And so he loses and he dies, and Jehoahaz becomes the next king. And we're going to go through quite a few kings pretty quickly here in the next chapter. So don't get too comfortable with any of these guys. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah, not Jeremiah the prophet. She was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his predecessors had done. Pharaoh Necho put him in chains at Riblah in the land of Hamath, so that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed on Judah a levy of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, son of Josiah, king in place of his father Josiah, and changed Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz and carried him off to Egypt, and there he died. Jehoiakim paid Pharaoh Necho the silver and gold he demanded. In order to do so, he taxed the land and exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land according to their assessment. So Jehoahaz, he's king for 3 months. Jehoahaz is actually the younger son of Josiah. Now, why Jehoahaz was put in place, I'm not really sure. So he is not a good king, and the Lord actually uses Pharaoh to take him out. And Pharaoh puts then Eliakim in his place instead, and Pharaoh changes his name to Jehoahaz. And this is interesting as they are changing, because this is not the only time a foreign king is going to change a king of Judah's name. But his doing this is kind of a power move for the Pharaoh to say, like, this was your name, I'm giving you a name. You are mine, essentially, in doing this. And so Jehoahaz means Yahweh had seized. And so here we have Egypt saying, you're mine, basically. And so the Yahweh has seized is a way of saying, like, God is using me to do this to you. McCall, do you have a question?
Isn't Jehoahaz is the one he takes, and Jehoiakim is the one that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, thank you. Got it. There's so many names. Jehoiakim is the new name. Jehoahaz is taken, and Jehoiakim is Yahweh has seized. So there's a bit of the Pharaoh's kind of flexing on Judah here, like, you are mine. This was God doing all of this to you through me. So Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. His mother's name was Zebidah, daughter of Pedaiah. She was from Rumah, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his predecessors had done. So again, we don't have a great king here. During Jehoiakim's reign, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded the land, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. But then he turned against Nebuchadnezzar and rebelled. The Lord sent Babylonian, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders against him to destroy Judah in accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by his servants, the prophets. Surely these things happened to Judah according to the Lord's command in order to remove them from his presence because of the sins of Manasseh and all he had done, including the shedding of innocent blood, for he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive. As for the other events of Jehoiakim's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Jehoiakim rested with his ancestors, and Jehoiakim, his son, succeeded him as king. The king of Egypt did not march out from his own country again, because the king of Babylon had taken all his territory, from the Wadi of Egypt to the Euphrates River. So while Jehoiakim is a vassal to Egypt, we then also have the Babylonians rising up here. And the Babylonians are the ones who are ultimately going to be used by God to remove Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and all of those things. But Jehoiakim seems to have a moment here to kind of break free. He tries, and the Babylonians bring all of the armies. The list here: Arameans, Moabites, and Ammonite raiders. All of these people were the very people that the Israelites were supposed to be driving out and defeating. They're still around. And so now the folks that the Israelites had defeated are rising up and being used by God to actually defeat his own people. And so there are there's many heartbreaks in these passages, as we're recognizing like these folks were supposed to have been dealt with a long time ago, but they weren't. And so, so the key thing as well as we're walking through this is it comes back to the sins of Manasseh. And as we read through the northern kings, kept going back to the sins of Jeroboam. Like Manasseh is Judah's Jeroboam, essentially. Like what he did was just so vile to the Lord that there's nothing here that will lead the Lord to relent. So it says he was not willing to forgive. And so the sins of the people are so much that the Lord is like, nope, these folks cannot remain in my presence, which is hard because God is everywhere. So that's one of the things as I read through this, like they can't remain in his presence, then where can they go? If God is everywhere, then where could they go? And so his presence is like hyper localized in Jerusalem because that's where he chose for his glory to dwell. And so that's part of like the presence that he's talking about is like, this is my favorite city in the whole world. You don't get to be a part of it, is basically what this it means. But now we have seen that the Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, they basically now own Egypt as well. It's like the king of Egypt did not march out because Nebuchadnezzar took it all, like everything, all of it. It's over. So now we have another king, Jehoiakim, king of Judah. He was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of El-Nathan. She was from Jerusalem. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done. At that time, the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and laid siege to it. Nebuchadnezzar himself came up to the city while his officers were besieging it. Jehoiakim, king of Judah, his mother, his attendants, his nobles, and all his officials surrendered to him. So they didn't even fight. Babylonians come and they're like, we give up. We surrender. In the 8th year of the reign of the king of Babylon, he, Nebuchadnezzar, took Jehoiakim prisoner, as the Lord had declared. Nebuchadnezzar removed the treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace and cut up the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of the Lord. He carried all Jerusalem into exile, all the officers and fighting men and all the skilled workers and artisans, a total of 10,000. Only the poorest people in the land were left. Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiakim captive to Babylon. He also took from Jerusalem to Babylon the king's mother, his wives, his officials, and the prominent people of the land. The king of Babylon also deported to Babylon the entire force of 7,000 fighting men, strong and fit for war, and 1,000 skilled workers and artisans. He made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in his place and changed his name to Zedekiah. So Jehoiakim gives up, and surrenders completely to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar then starts taking the people and the stuff. And so one of the questions that people have, like from this period, is like, all right, so they go into the temple and they start taking all of the gold, and some of that gold ends up back in Babylon, because we read about in Daniel, they start throwing parties, and they're drinking from the gold goblets and stuff that were a part of the temple. And that's when God writes on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, you have been weighed and found wanting. So that's a whole another thing. But the question here is like, okay, so what happened to the other stuff, like the lampstand and the altar of the table of showbread and the altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant? And, there's some case that, Jeremiah kind of secreted some of these things out, like maybe the Ark of the Covenant. But here, like all of what Kings is telling us is that everything was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, all of the articles that Solomon had made. So we should stop looking for them, is basically what I want to take away from this. So if there are people who claim that there's a community in Ethiopia that claims that they have the Ark of the Covenant, I just don't think they do. So like, regardless, like if the Lord is allowing these things to be destroyed and we see this in Scripture, then we should let go of them. Like, just as the Hezekiah destroyed the bronze snake, like there are things that, like, the Ark of the Covenant is not necessary for us anymore. We don't need to look for it. The table of showbread, we don't need it. It's gone. Let it go. And so, so that's Nebuchadnezzar is actually kind of being used by God to like break apart the things that he has instructed them to build, because of the massive corruption that was in the temple in the first place, from Manasseh. Like all of it is now unclean. And so God doesn't want it anymore. And so when we get back to the temple, one of the questions is, do they build a new Ark of the Covenant? Like, because we don't get that instruction anywhere, but did they do it? Because they built a temple and they built a Holy of Holies. They built a room. Like, what was in there? Like, what did they put in there? And so when the temple curtain is torn from top to bottom, when Jesus is crucified and he says, "It is finished," and the curtain is torn, what was in there? I don't know. So, there's many mysteries, and I just don't have a time machine, and I can't get there. So, Jehoiakim is taken out. Zedekiah is put in his place, and Zedekiah is another name change here. I looked it up, what it means. I want to make sure. Sorry. So Mattaniah, the third son of Josiah, becomes the king. Zedekiah, Yahweh is righteous, or righteousness of Yahweh. And so even though it sounds like, oh, that's a nice name, but what Nebuchadnezzar is doing is he is saying, like, all that I am doing to you is your own God saying this is right. And Nebuchadnezzar is not wrong. This is what God wanted. This is exactly what God said would happen. And so when Nebuchadnezzar and Necho were changing the names of the kings, like it's kind of a prophetic act to confirm God's word, but it should sting deeply. Even as we read this, like our heart, like we are not Israelites, right? We're not Judahites, but like our hearts are tied to this story of the people of God. Like these things, like if we just read through it, it's like, that's weird, they're changing all these names. But when we actually stop and think, like this should sting really deeply. It's like if somebody came and like changed like our like city, like our region, right? I love Seattle. I love this region. And they just named it like dumpster fire, right? Like that would really actually kind of hurt my heart. Like, cause I do love this place, as messed up as our region is and all the trouble that we have. It's like, no, but I do like this place. It's beautiful here in so many ways. But if all it was known for was all of its corruption, then that should sting. That should hurt. And so, yeah, so Zedekiah is one more king who is put on the throne. He was 20 years old. Did I read verse 18 already? No. Okay. All right. That's where I want to be. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah. She was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as Jehoiakim had done. It was because of the Lord's anger that all this happened to Jerusalem and Judah, and in the end, he thrust them from his presence. Now, Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. So in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. He encamped outside the city and built siege works all around it. The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat. Then the city wall was broken through, and the whole army fled at night through the gate between the two walls near the king's garden, though the Babylonians were surrounding the city. They fled toward Arabah, but the Babylonian army pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his soldiers were separated from him and scattered, and he was captured. So this is during Jeremiah's ministry as a prophet. He's going to talk about these events. Lamentations is after the fall of Jerusalem and dealing with the aftermath and the grief of God's chosen city being destroyed, and dealing with like just the pain of that. And so Zedekiah tries to run away as the people are starving, and the wall breaks, and he tries to run away, but the Babylonians capture them and did like basically wipe out all of the fighting forces. On the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, an official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with the rest of the populace and those who had deserted the king of Babylon. But the commander left behind some of the poorest people of the land to work the vineyards and the fields. And so when we talk about the exile, we are the first people that the Babylonians took were the officials, the royals, the influential folks. That's like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those folks, that class of people were taken first into exile. This is then another round of exile, which gathers up all the people, except for farmers, because Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians know that they still want to be able to produce as much as they can, even if the population is less. And so they leave people to take the land, but they take all of the influential people and important, in heavy quotes, the important folks away. So verse 13, the Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the movable stands, and the bronze sea that were at the temple of the Lord, and they carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, shovels, wick trimmers, dishes, and all the bronze articles used in the temple service. The commander of the imperial guard took away the censers and the sprinkling bowls, all that were made of pure gold and silver. The bronze from the two pillars the sea and the movable stands which Solomon had made for the temple of the Lord was more than could be weighed. Each pillar was 18 cubits high. The bronze capital on the top of one pillar was 3 cubits high and was decorated with a network of pomegranates of bronze all around. The other pillar with its network was similar. The commander of the guard took as prisoners Seraiah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, the priest next in rank, and the 3 doorkeepers. Of those still in the city, he took the officer in charge of the fighting men and the 5 royal advisors. He also took the secretary, who was chief officer in charge of conscripting the people of the land, and 60 of the conscripts who were found in the city. Nebuzaradan, the commander, took them all and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. There at Riblah, in the land of Hamath, the king had them executed. So Judah went into captivity away from her land. And this is in 586 BC, is when this final event happened. These events are also captured in like the Babylonian records. Like this isn't just the Bible telling us what's happening, but Babylonians took really good records of all the things that they did. And so these are verified and cross-checked, and like all this stuff is it's affirmed in extra biblical sources. And one of the dates that we can know for sure is when Jerusalem fell, 586 BC. Like there isn't a doubt of when that happened. And the decimation or destruction of Jerusalem is total, tearing down the walls, burning the palace, burning the temple. All of it is destroyed. Everything that gave Jerusalem any splendor or glory, gone. When they come back to the land after the exile, they will rebuild the temple. And it's 70 years that they're in exile in Babylon. 70 years is a long time, but there are people who lived in Jerusalem and were young, and after the exile were able to come back, and they saw the temple rebuilt, and they wept because they remembered the former glory. Like they never got back to what was. And even Herod in the temple, when he rebuilds the temple before Jesus is born, the temple then is big and it's impressive, but Jesus isn't impressed by it. Like not one stone of this temple will remain. Jesus sees it for what it is. It's just a substitute for what was the glory of Jerusalem. So Judah is carried into captivity away from the land. Verse 22. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, appointed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, to be over the people he had left behind in Judah. So Gedaliah is basically the secretary's son. So he's not a descendant of David, but he's put in charge. When all the army officers and their men heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah as governor, they came to Gedaliah at Mitzpah. Ishmael, son of Netaniah, Johanan, son of Kareah, Seraiah, son of Tenahumet, the Netophanite, just in case you were wondering if there was another one, Jezaniah, the son of Maakathite, and their men. Gedaliah took an oath to reassure them and their men. Do not be afraid of the Babylonian officials, he said. Settle down in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will go well with you. In the 7th month, however, Ishmael, son of Netaniah, the son of Elishama, who was of royal blood, came with 10 men and assassinated Gedaliah and also the men of Judah and the Babylonians who were with him at Mitzpah. At this, all the people from the least to the greatest, together with the army officers, fled to Egypt for fear of the Babylonians. So even Gedaliah, who's put in charge, who's saying like, just y'all, let's just be peaceful. Let's be quiet. Let's just do what they say and we'll live. But there's this kid, Ishmael, who's got some royal blood in him. He's part of the David's family. He's like, nah, I can't have Gedaliah telling me what to do. And so he's like one of the first in the scriptures of the zealots and the long tradition of zealots that will follow into Jesus's time. But he's the first to come and say, no, we're going to make our own king here. And so, but they kill Gedaliah, and then they're afraid and they run away. So really good king material. So Second Kings is full of despair here at the end. Like I don't know. I make jokes because it's just too sad, right? But it ends with this tiny little bit of hope in Jehoiakim being released. Because remember, Jehoiakim was taken away. Did I skip that Zedekiah was killed and had his eyes gouged out? I skipped that. Zedekiah rebelled and they killed him, and they gouged out. They killed all his sons, and then they took out his eyes as punishment. I don't know why I skipped that. Maybe because it's too sad. So it's all bad. Like it's all bad. But Jehoiakim was taken away into Babylon and lived basically in house arrest of some sort. Or here in 27, Nebuchadnezzar has died, and his son has ascended into the throne at this point. In the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the year of Marduk became king of Babylon. So this is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. He released Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. He did this on the 27th day of the 12th month. He spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat of honor higher than those of the other kings who were with him in Babylon. So the other kings that the Babylonians had conquered, they're all there now in the Babylonian capital, but Jehoiakim gets a higher place of honor among all of those. So Jehoiakim put aside his prison clothes, and for the rest of his life ate regularly at the king's table. Day by day, the king gave Jehoiakim a regular allowance as long as he lived. And that's where the writer of Kings stops. And people have different theories on why does he stop here. And the main thing to go along with the theme throughout the book is the preservation of the line of David. And while Jehoiakim is not sitting on the throne in Jerusalem, there are descendants of Jehoiakim that remain. Like the line of David is not wiped out. And so all of those other kings that like the Babylonians were putting on the throne, none of them were rightful kings, but Jehoiakim was. And so even in captivity, the Lord is preserving for himself the seed for the future. And so that's most likely why the book of Kings ends there. It's like, yeah, things are terrible, but our king, as bad as he is, as imperfect as he is, he remains, and God's not done. And so as we wrap up the history of Judah and recognizing like, yeah, their wickedness, Manasseh's sins were terrible, but God keeps his promises, and God still promised that there would be a descendant of David who would reign forever. And while Jehoiakim's not going to do it, and for many, 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 many years, they're not going to have a king on the throne. But then comes Jesus, the son of David, who reigns forever, even now. And so, yeah. So for a Christian reading these books, like that's our hope, is like in that little moment, like, oh, look what God's doing, preserving the line of David to be fulfilled in Jesus. Yeah. But it's still sad at the end. It's heartbreaking to see the destruction and what sin does to a people. So yeah, but let's wrap there. Any questions, any observations?
Seems like it's constant turmoil and destruction and death for centuries.
Yeah. What Janet said was, it just seems like constant turmoil and death and destruction. Yeah, it is it's a long road. And so finding Deuteronomy here at the end of the history of Judah, it's like, man, what would have happened if the kings took these commands seriously? how would things be different? How would things be different if Solomon, in all of his wisdom, wasn't a selfish idiot? How would it be different if Rehoboam listened to the older advisors instead of the younger advisors? And it all, like, those decisions, like, set the nation down a road that led to their ultimate destruction. As the king goes, so goes the nation. And so, yeah, it's very, very sad, very sad. Any other thoughts or questions on all that we covered? Kevin.
We see that Nebuchadnezzar took all the treasures from the temple and things like that. Was that the second time this has happened?
It's like the third or fourth
Oh.
time. Yeah. Yeah. So the Assyrians took some stuff, but that was mainly the kings at the time saying, like, take this,
Okay.
go away, please let us buy off our freedom here from you. Then Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes some things, and then about 10 years later comes back and takes everything. Yeah, so it comes in waves. But, and I don't know if they tried to like redo some stuff, and then they're like, hey, I see you got some more nice stuff there. So I'll take that too. So yeah, but the Babylonians were, they were brutal, and they were efficient in their destruction of other nations. So yeah, it's interesting just the rise of these empires and how they come, and how, while Nebuchadnezzar thinks he's like king of the universe, he's still just a pawn in God's plan here. Like, God's king, not Nebuchadnezzar. So, and it seems like he recognizes there's some great power here when he's renaming the kings to say, no, this is what God wanted. But at the same time, we will see in Daniel, when we get to Daniel in 48 years, when we get to Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar like puffs himself up real big, and God just like stomps him down. So it's fun. It's fun. So yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
Can I ask, well, not question, but what you
Yeah,
just
Carrie.
said, Daniel, it comes 48 years. That's what my question was Daniel taken during these, quests?
Yeah,
Or-
Daniel was taken during these probably the first round of deportations. Was when Daniel was
Okay.
taken. So it wasn't 48 years. I was saying, like, when we get to talking about Daniel jokingly in 48 years, it should not take that long. I was just saying.
Okay. So it is during this time frame that the book
Yes.
of Daniel starts.
Yeah. And so Daniel was an influential person in the Jerusalem system. And so
Yeah.
that's why he was taken, is because he was already recognized as a person of influence, of great education. And so
Yeah.
the Babylonians were consistently taking the best and the brightest and trying to assimilate them into their own system to help make the empire stronger. And so that's
Yeah.
why they took Daniel and the other three guys. They have Hebrew names. I can never remember them though. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are their Babylonian names.
Okay. Thank you for answering that one for me.
Yeah. Did you have a question, Michael? No. Okay. All right. All right. Any other thoughts, questions?
I got one.
Yes. Jane.
The let me read. The Aramean Moabites and the Ammonites,
Mhm.
were they the tribes that were supposed to be completely destroyed when
Well, they
Israel-
were part of
Where?
the eastern side of the Jordan River. So they were on the east. The Canaanites were in the western side, and those were the ones that were supposed to be destroyed. But the
Completely.
Lord used Israel to actually defeat the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Arameans as they were coming into take the land. And so that's in like Numbers, is where we read about those things. But the people of Israel were constantly following after the gods of those nations.
Yeah, I know.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so they weren't part of the
I
Canaanite
just wondered if
conquest.
it was. Yeah,
So,
yeah, if they were supposed to be totally destroyed and they weren't. So, but that's not true. That's
Yeah, so
because
they
they're
weren't-
on the wrong.
they were not supposed to have any kind of power over the people of
Mm-hmm.
Israel. As the main thing that I wanted to communicate. They were supposed to be much weaker, but because the people of Israel kept going after their gods, they kept having influence over Israel. So, all right, any other thoughts, questions? All right.
It's pretty intense, the fact that even though, was it Josiah did all that good, and God's anger still was not assuaged.
Yes, yeah. God, yeah. The reforms of Josiah were great, a great effort. But it was a drop in the bucket compared to the sin of Manasseh, essentially. So yeah. Well, next week we are jumping into Isaiah. So we're jumping past a lot if you're just reading through page by page. And so Isaiah comes after Song of Songs. In my Bible, it's on page 619. I don't know what it is in your Bible. But if you want to read ahead, then feel free to do that. This is where things start to get interesting because we're going to start dealing a lot with metaphor and poetry. We haven't really done that yet. And so I am not a Hebrew scholar, and there are things, I know, I'm sorry. There are things in Hebrew that I'm sure, like if I knew Hebrew better, it would like really just sing to us. I'll do my best. But this is a big book. It's 66 chapters. There are questions about authorship at different points. But it is there are things in here that we're going to read and be like, hey, I thought that was about Jesus and his miraculous birth, and it's a yes and so we're going to talk about that kind of stuff. So just be ready for some interesting stuff in Isaiah. It gets weird. So all right, I'll see you all on Sunday and next week, and have a good night.